Very cool.
Nice to see you too, Emma.
All right, I'll kick us off. My name is Tracey Maynard. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good morning for me. I'm tuning in here from Shisheth territory on the west coast of Vancouver Island. I'm the director of the Climate Emergency Unit, so I have the most wonderful job of getting to talk to Canadians across the country every single day who are inspiring and hopeful and taking the climate emergency really seriously. So I have one of the few jobs where I watch people move from climate anxiety to action and hope. And so I hope I can bring a bit of that to you today. I'd like to pass it over to my other colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on reviewing our agenda.
Well, I'll go and then Robin. Okay. So my name's Emma Norton. I'm in Mi'kma'ki in Bunamagwajuk, which is actually in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. But I am trying to do some more organizing in New Brunswick. I grew up in Ebegwit, PEI, and I'm the director of communications and the Atlantic organizer for the Climate Emergency Unit. I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking today because I'm just going to make sure that tech and time is flowing correctly. Yeah, so glad to be here. Thank you. Lalio.
Hey, I'm Robin. I'm one of the campaigners with the Council of Canadians. I'm actually just down the street from Emma, which is nice. And yeah, we just are coming off, we're on the tail end of a week of action called the Climate Code Red Week of Action for a Just Transition. And so we're really glad to have you here in this workshop so you can tag in on, or decide if you're going to tag in on some of this work around just transition legislation, and that's what we'll be talking about through this whole workshop. So I'll pass it back to Tracey to get us going.
So if you folks want to introduce yourselves in the chat, I would love to hear from you. You can include your name, your pronouns. I use she, her pronouns. And you can see that I've actually changed my name here on my screen to say Tracey Maynard, she, her, and then Shishaswia, that's where I live. So if you want to add your pronouns to your name on your profile, how you do it is you just go to participants and then click your name, and then you can click rename and you can just add that in, and then folks know how to address you and don't make any assumptions. So drop a little intro in the chat. We'd love to know why you wanted to attend this workshop, where you're tuning in from, your name, and if you're representing any organizations, we'd love to know that too. And so as those roll in, I'm just going to begin. Let's look at the agenda. So this is what we're going to cover in our short hour together today. We're going to talk about what a government looks like in emergency mode. We're going to overview our strategy for the next 100 days with the new government at the federal level. We are going to talk about the Council of Canadians' amazing organizing plan to mobilize Canada and make sure that MPs feel the pressure. So we're going to go through the petition strategy and how to talk to MPs. Then we're going to answer some questions and make sure that everybody's equipped to just go forth and organize. And then we'll close. So it's an action-packed hour. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want your face recorded, just turn off your video. It's totally fine, but of course we'd like to see you if you're comfortable with that. So with that, I'll begin. So why do we talk about climate emergency? The unit that I work for is called the Climate Emergency Unit to make sure that we are always prioritizing emergency number one. As I'm sure all of you know, we've had too long of incremental non-action on climate. And so it's really important that we move from climate change to climate emergency, because it shifts our response from something that's going to happen or inevitable to something that's happening that we can actually make a difference on, and we can make it better for people. So we're looking for a whole society approach to the climate emergency, and we have a few markers of what that really means so that we know for sure if a government is taking it as seriously as we are. So at the Climate Emergency Unit, we've developed these 5 markers, and so I'm just going to go through them one by one. So the first is spend what it takes to win. So we know a government is in emergency mode if they're actually funding it. So often we see these very good talking points, especially in an election, of all the great things that a government's going to do. But if they don't actually put the money behind it, they stay as great things that the government will do in the future and that aren't doing now. Next marker. Create the new institutions to get the job done. So this came from Seth Klein's, all these markers come from Seth Klein's book. And one of the more inspirational stories I find in that book is how fast Canada mobilized in World War II, and how so many industries just switched over. And they did that because the government made it possible. They put new institutions in charge to make sure that industries were mobilizing and we were creating the things that need to happen. I was so inspired to see how, like we needed ships, so we built ships, and huge amounts of capital and sectors were shifted very quickly under these new institutions. Marker 3, shift from voluntary to mandatory. So we know for too long, again, we've just been depending on the kindness of industries to switch, and that hasn't happened fast enough. So we need to switch from voluntary to mandatory. Marker 4, tell the truth. So if we're not telling the truth, if we're not actually equipping Canadians with the information that they need to make appropriate decisions on the climate emergency, we're going to stay in this land of denial until the emergency really overwhelms us. There's also so much power and so much solidarity that comes when you tell the truth. I was so inspired by Anjali Appadurai's campaign in Vancouver Granville this year, because she told the truth about the emergency and it didn't scare people. It inspired them to action and it built trust and it made folks feel like, a sense of hope, because people can tell when you're not telling the truth. And so that's something that we need to see from our government in emergency mode. I think all the time about Justin Trudeau standing outside in front of his house all winter through COVID, giving updates on COVID-19. And we need that same level of information sharing, real time, and that accountability to Canadians every day. Marker 5, leave nobody behind. So a lot of folks are going to have to transition in this. And we know that marginalized folks are on the front lines of the climate emergency. In Vancouver with the heat dome, we saw 600 people die in one weekend. And that was, unfortunately, the report just came out and most of those folks were the folks that lived alone, who didn't have adequate housing. And so we know that all of our climate emergency work is going to have to make sure that these folks are centered and that we're looking at and telling the truth about what really needs to happen so that those folks are with us at the end of this or through it. Next. So here's our first 100-day strategy. This is for the climate emergency unit, but it works hand in hand with our friends at Council of Canadians. So we're so happy to partner on this project together. So for the climate emergency unit, we are strategically using this 100-day window as a chance to push a new agenda through the government. We saw that with the Sunrise Movement and Biden, how important it was in the first 100 days to set a new agenda. And the Sunrise Movement in the States is made up largely of a youth movement, but also folks who are very focused on environmental legislation. And they did an incredible organizing effort and a huge push within the first 100 days to make sure that that was the focus of all the new legislation that would then set the tone and term for the rest of the mandate. So it's a very strategic time now to put this effort in before the new government gets kind of set in place, before the mandate letters happen and before folks get complacent. So these are our strategy. That's our strategy, and here are some of our tactics we're going to use. We're going to meet with all the MPs, and they're especially focused on new MPs, climate champions, the folks that we think could have a larger voice in the Liberal caucus. We're going to review the mandate letters and all of the cabinet choices and do some analysis on what that means for the climate emergency, but also making sure that as we're meeting with them, that we're holding them accountable to what's in their mandate. COP25, some of our staff here at the, well, I guess not staff, some of our strategic partners at the Climate Emergency Unit are attending COP. So they're going to do a workshop letting us know what's happening and how Canada is actually being viewed on the international stage. And then we're mobilizing leaders from different sectors. So my focus here at the Climate Emergency Unit is mobilizing arts and culture, food and agriculture, youth, first responders, health workers, and faith workers. They're all listed there on the slide. So if you're from any of these sectors and you want to work on mobilizing your industry specifically, please get in touch with me. After the workshop, I'd love to talk to you about the different tables that we're mobilizing to meet with their specific ministers. So we want to focus on those influential ministers that have an outsized impact on climate. Ministers like Christy Freeland, who has so much of the power to spend what it takes to win, for example. So this workshop today is going to focus more on the first point, the MP meetings. Council of Canadians has created a really beautiful strategy, so it makes so much sense for us to be working together. So we're so happy to organize together and participate in this campaign. So I'm going to pass it over to Robin, and she's going to outline the strategy.
Thanks, Tracey. Hello, I'm Robin. One additional piece of context I want to add here is, I think many of us know, like, the fact that we're in a climate emergency is not a secret, but I think it's important to recognize that one key reason that our governments have consistently failed to take it seriously and to take appropriate action is that the lobbyists and the lobbying effort of the fossil fuel industry over the last several decades has been absolutely outrageous and has had a huge impact on policy, both to do with climate, general environmental legislation, healthcare, or not healthcare, public health, you name it. Big oil has had their fingers in that pie for a long time. And so where we've seen this kind of really unbelievable lobbying effort by the fossil fuel industry, we need to combat that right where they're reaching the government by doing some lobbying ourselves in a really coordinated way. And we've seen this, like, even just 2 weeks ago, we saw the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers like spending, I think it was over $50,000 on Facebook ads to convince people to participate in a consultation about the just transition and convince them to say things that were actually in favor of the industry and not in favor of climate action. And then we've seen that industry, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, having that kind of impact on policymaking just for as long as I can remember. So we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. But with that, I'll get straight into the strategy that we're using. Emma, can I have the next slide, please? Maybe it's frozen. Cool. Right, and then another piece of context, it's October 2021, lots of things are going on. Cabinet is being announced, I think, next week. COP26, is it 25 or 26? Anyway, the climate negotiations are happening in Glasgow starting in a few weeks. Student strikes have happened in September and October. This is just a really ripe moment, like Tracey was saying, to be pushing further and harder on climate legislation. So that's where we are right now. And that's why we've come to this realization, this strategy, that MPs have to publicly support a just transition and legislation that will drive a just transition. That is the current appropriate response to the climate emergency. And that's what we want to see in the first 100 days. So what we've done is we've taken a tool that has existed for a long time, a classic parliamentary petition, and we've turned it into a tool that we can use to organize. So what we're having, the Council of Canadians and many partners like the Climate Emergency Unit, we've been asking our members and our folks across the country to pick up this petition and get signatures on paper in batches of 25. 25 is the minimum number of signatures you need on a petition in order to ask your MP to then table it and speak about it in the House. And so the idea here is that if people across the country in different ridings in different places are taking these petitions to their MPs, asking them to speak publicly in the House of Commons in support of just transition legislation now, then we can build waves of support and waves of pressure in the legislature to bring that legislation forward. And this is a dual strategy. There's the part where we can put pressure on MPs, but there's also the necessary part of building our movements. And so in order to collect 25 signatures, you've got to talk to 24 people, presuming that you're also signing that petition yourself. So you're going to have a lot of conversations with your neighbors, people in organizations, people across your community. You're going to be able to hear from people about what they think a just transition is, why it's important to them. And you're going to build those relationships so that we can keep this movement growing and continue applying that political pressure to build the will to actually pass the legislation. So that's our strategy. It's pretty simple, but I think it's powerful. I just want to walk through the petition demands. I think, Emma, you have the link and you could drop it in the chat, or if not, I can get it for you. But I'll just walk through what the petition calls for. So we're asking for legislation, just transition legislation, that reduces emissions by at least 60% below 2005 levels by 2030, and makes significant contributions to emissions reductions in countries in the global south. And this is because Canada's emissions over time have been so huge that we actually, in order to make a fair share contribution to climate action, we need to also be doing climate emissions reductions outside our own borders. So we need to reduce emissions. We need legislation that winds down the fossil fuel industry and related infrastructure, that ends fossil fuel subsidies and helps us transition to a decarbonized economy. We need that legislation to create new economic institutions, like Tracey was saying, as one of the markers. And we need to expand public ownership of services and utilities to implement this transition. So that means bringing things like power generation, transit, healthcare, all of these things. These need to be protected and brought back under public ownership. We need to create good green jobs and drive inclusive workforce development led by and including affected workers. And we need to ensure decent low carbon work for everyone. I'll grab the next. Thank you, Emma. So we need this legislation. It needs to protect and strengthen human rights and workers' rights. This is the leave no one behind part. We need to respect Indigenous rights and sovereignty and really meaningfully include Indigenous peoples and their knowledges in creating the legislation. We need to ensure migrant justice and emphasize support for historically marginalized communities, so no one is left behind as we make this transition. We need to expand the social safety net through new income supports and decarbonized public housing and operational funding for accessible public transit countrywide. And we need to pay for that all somehow, probably through increasing taxes on the wealthiest and corporations and financing through a public bank. So these are all the demands that we want to see. This is what we want our just transition legislation to do. And I hope that you find that inspiring, because when I look at that list of things, I see a future I want to live in. So that's the petition. I'm just going to look at my notes so I'm not rambling on too long, because I tend to do that when I get a bit excited. Okay, so there's the petition. And how does this process work? So I kind of described it. What we're asking folks to do is take this petition, print it out. One key feature is that it needs to be printed on legal size paper. You might have gathered from my long speech that it's a bit of a long petition, so it needs to be printed on a big piece of paper. You need to collect 25 physical signatures from folks in your community, including yourselves. Those people can be of any age. They don't need to be citizens. They're just people who live here can sign this petition. Once you've got 25 signatures, you can reach out to your MP or any MP in Canada and ask them to table this petition and speak about it. There's an option for MPs to only table it without speaking about it, but we really want them to be speaking publicly in the House of Commons about this petition. And I think if you go to the next slide, some of this is also on that. Thank you. And yeah, so you'll do the petition, you'll get it signed, you'll talk to your MP, you'll ask them to present it in the House. If they agree, you'll hand over those petitions, those actual pieces of paper, and you'll report back to your community and to us about how that went. If your MP says no, you'll report back to your community, you'll let us know how that went, and we'll help you figure out what to do next. So there's the petition link is in the chat. There's also a whole toolkit that it basically explains everything I just said, but you can have it for your own use as we go along. And there's one key feature here. So you don't have to go to your own MP. It can be anybody. I kind of recommend you do go to your own MP because it helps you build a relationship with them. The reason you might consider going to an MP that's not yours is if your MP is like a known terrible climate denier and it might not be that fruitful, you can go to someone maybe next door. or if you're working in a community like where I live in Dartmouth and Halifax, there's a couple of MPs, and so you could strategically choose one in the area to go to. We can talk more. We are going to speak more about that in a minute, but just highlight that feature. And so what's happening so far? Lots of things. We're on the very end of a week of action where we have had 50 groups across Canada in 24 locations doing petition drives, rallies, conferences, and other kinds of events to build momentum and grow support for this just transition legislation. And many of those people are already out in the street. They've got their petitions, they're getting them signed, they're asking their MPs for meetings. We have 4,500 letters sent to the Prime Minister that basically reiterate the petition, has all the same points, and ask for that legislation. And then I put this really silly winky face that like kind of makes me cringe, but it's worthwhile here because we have some MPs who have committed and we're going to be making some announcements on Monday. So like wink, wink, this ship is sailing, this is happening. And so we hope that you would be enthusiastic to join this strategy that's already ongoing. You won't be the first people, you won't be the last people. I think that we're well positioned together to make a huge impact to get us closer to that just transition legislation. So I think this is time for questions, right?
It's on to me, right?
Yes.
So we're just
going to
take a few
just
minutes.
pause here for some
Oh,
questions.
Yeah, we were going to pause
right.
the questions. Does anyone have any questions so far?
I do. I don't know if this has been done yet in St. John. Is it possible to find out if anybody has taken this on? I think there's still a Council Canadians chapter here. I don't know.
Yeah, no one has let me know in St. John that they're doing this yet. I know folks in Fredericton are. I'm very open to the possibility that people are doing this and they haven't told me, because that happens every time, which is great. But to my knowledge, no. So Linnea, if you do it, that would be awesome.
All right, and just a side note, I am a member of Council Canadians. I rejoined.
Yes. Great. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. There's lots of time for discussion also later, so if more questions come up, don't be shy to ask them when you have them. But Tracey.
So just taking some time to think through what MP you most want to meet with. Do you folks have a sense of whether or not you'd want to meet with your own MPs? Yes, I'm seeing a couple of nods. Anyone who really doesn't, you can say in the chat if you want, if you really don't want to meet with your own MPs. Is there anyone on this call saying that?
Well, I'd be interested too to get maybe your experience on this too. And Lois mentioned this in the chat. We have 10 MPs in New Brunswick, where I live as well as where Quinn lives. We have Dominic LeBlanc, who's obviously a pretty prominent, or has been a pretty prominent feature in the Liberal government. And well, he's been our MP for over 20 years, so he's been around for a while. But also, specifically with, his relationship with the Prime Minister, obviously, has been a pretty prominent feature. So I guess in the context of these types of initiatives, when you've worked on them in the past, do you find it useful to go and target those high profile MPs that obviously have a lot of other things coming at them? And if so, what kind of strategies, or would the strategies be different, I guess, for an MP, maybe a new MP or someone who doesn't have as many other responsibilities? Is there a different strategy in terms of approaching them or kind of getting an audience with them? So I'd be interested in thoughts on that.
Thanks, Adam. So I think that the folks who have an influential MP as their representative are pretty well positioned to make a big difference. So as Robin said, I do also agree with meeting with your own MP for a couple of reasons, whether they're influential or not. And the first is that you are the ones who elected them. And I think very often they don't really feel the pressure at home, especially if they are folks who've been elected many times. And so they're often in rooms where it's the lobbyists that are controlling the narrative. You know, I've met with several here in BC like that who are just saying, you know, we never hear from constituents about climate. It's just special interest groups over and over and over again. I'm not hearing it in my riding. And so you have a really special role to play in making it alive in the riding for them. And you have access that a lot of other folks don't have. So there might be folks all across the country, you know, or all across your province who are trying to access them. But you have a special way in, and really they are supposed to be accountable to you. So the more that they can feel like the ground shifting in the riding of the priorities of their constituents, the better, I would say. And also, you know, we've been meeting, Emma has had tons of meetings with folks all across Atlantic Canada about the 4 markers, and introducing that framework so that they know what they're going to be evaluated on is really important, because so often they can be really slippery, right? They're like, oh yeah, we campaigned on this. Of course we care about it. Our targets are great. You know, we're meeting them. But if we're not actually funding it, if we're not spending, or if we're not creating the institutions to get it done, if we're not telling the truth, all of these things, that really makes it very clear to them that we're watching in a way and holding them accountable in a way that they can't really slip out of in ways that they typically have. So I would say that it's exciting that you can meet with them, and you should definitely take advantage of that opportunity and make it really clear how important it is to you. Bring your personal stories. So when I think about meeting with an MP, I have kind of a set of things that I think through before I go into a meeting with them. So I want to make sure that I know who they're listening to, you know, who's most influential to them, how they're thinking about like their legacy, what their special projects are that they want to leave behind, their family. You know, I often try and figure out, can I figure out who they donate to, both their time and their energy, you know, what are the key messages that they're often sharing? So that when I go into that meeting, I'm seeing them as a whole person, first of all. You know, I think MPs are used to kind of these transactional, like, give me what I want type of meetings. And those are, you know, necessary, but also, you know, there are people too who can be influenced, who are influenced. And the more that we are targeting them on who they actually want to be, holding them accountable to their own words, you know, if they've said specific things through the election, bringing that back to them and saying, you know, I was really moved by this. What are you going to do about it now? You have my support. It's a nice way to approach them, but also being firm and clear about what you want to see. So having those both sides of it are really important. So when you're thinking through, you know, who you want to have signed a petition, think about your MP and who would be influential to them to see on that petition. You know, so often we just go and get as many of the easy signatures we can to fill out the sheet. But if you have 25 names on a sheet and you go and meet with him, and all of the names are people he recognizes, you know, folks who've donated to his past campaigns, people who are in the businesses near where his office is that he has to face every day, those kind of, you know, influential people that are in his realm. That's really important to draw attention to. So you can use the petition as a way of really building local power as well. So it's not just, you know, a group of random names that are kind of anonymous to them. You can really maximize your sphere of influence in this petition. So I think it's a really beautiful tool to use. And then you can also invite those folks who signed the petition to come to the MP meeting with you. So like the more you can maximize that power in your petition, the better. Yeah. Any other questions about who you would choose?
I might just add that, Tracey, that the ministers are important for all the reasons that Tracey said, and legislatively in this context where we're in a minority government again, liberal backbenchers are also really important because they are less likely to be kind of required to toe the party line. They have a little bit, some of them are newer, some of them have a little more I don't know if I would call it autonomy. I don't know if I would call it that either. But like, there's a little more room for liberal backbenchers, especially where that party has said that they're going to put forward Just Transition Act. They say they're going to do environmental stuff. We all know, we all have our opinions about what that is. Usually they're not good enough. But yeah, those liberal backbenchers can also play a huge role in this specific tactic as well. So you could consider that.
Any other questions before we move on to the specifics of what the MP meeting will look like? Just gonna check and see in case anyone wrote anything in the chat. Okay, let's move on. Robin, over to you.
Oh yeah, that's me. That's my turn. Let me get my notes. I think we're also running short on time. Emma sent me a note that said we only have 10 minutes left, which is a bit of a tragedy. So maybe we'll rail through this. So you've got some petition signatures. You've asked your MP for a meeting. You have a meeting. It's probably on Zoom because we're still in a pandemic. So you're in the meeting. Here's what some of the things you can say. All of these things are also in the toolkit, which Emma linked in the chat. So you can have your notes there. But ideally, you'd introduce yourself. You'd introduce either you're a member of the Council of Canadians or your affiliation to another organization. Everyone in the meeting should introduce themselves. Like Tracey said, try to see them as a whole human. And what I like to do is start by asking what the MP knows about a just transition. This can just give you a lot of clues about whether they're a total newbie to this idea, whether they've thought about it a lot. It can just be a great way to start the conversation and not have it just be like an info dump, but a real conversation. So you can explain what the petition is and why it's important to you. If you have a personal story to connect to the demands in the petition or the idea of a just transition, that would be a wonderful thing to ask or to add. And then the real purpose of the whole thing is to ask them to table the petition and read it aloud in Parliament. And you'll probably want to take notes on what their response to that is. And if you have to ask a few times or a few different ways to get a clear answer to that question of whether they'll table the petition and speak about it, that's fine to do. If the meeting goes well and everyone's okay with it, you can take a picture of the meeting group, just a little selfie with your phone, or if you're on Zoom, you can take a screenshot. And the idea there is just that can help you post something on social media. We can amplify it to demonstrate to more people in the riding and across the country that this work is happening. Post that picture on social media if you feel like it. And then the part that I forgot to add to this slide is that we'd love to know how those meetings went. Did they say yes? Did they say no? What did you hear? What kind of talking points did they have? Because I think we're going to learn a lot through this process of speaking to a lot of MPs, and it's going to help us update our strategy and give you all folks who are participating in this the best information you can have going into those meetings. So if you look in that toolkit, which we've linked a few times, we'll make sure you have it. All of this is in there, and there's a link in there to a form where you can report back quickly on the meeting, because we would really love to have that information about how it went. So if the MP agrees that they will table it, they should know what to do, but you can ask them to get the petitions clerk of the House of Commons to certify the petitions. That just means someone else checks them over to make sure they're legit. And then ask them to let you know the date that they'll speak about it. Every MP gets about a minute a day, I think, in the House of Commons to speak. So let them know, ask them to let you know when they'll do that. And if they say that they're not going to do it or they won't give you a straight answer, ask them why not and try to take notes or record it somehow, because I think that will be really instructive for us too of combating some resistant people. And we recommend that if you have a meeting, you plan an extra 20 or 30 minutes afterwards so that you can debrief with all your folks that you go with, just to talk about how the meeting went, if it went well, who did well, congratulate folks on their showing up and doing their thing, and then plan next steps if any follow-up is needed with the MP. Yeah, some questions you can ask yourself for evaluating the meeting afterwards in that debrief. It's like, how did it feel? Was it useful? Was it patronizing? Did you wish you asked a different question? How did we do? What could we have done better? What did we do well as constituents in the meeting? Recognizing folks' contribution, make sure no one feels bad leaving that meeting. I've been in tons of meetings with MPs that like they didn't go the way I wanted, crummy, and so you want to make sure that your team feels okay and that they're making progress, even if you didn't get the thing you wanted out of the meeting. And then to make sure that you confirm the next steps and action items and responsibilities for following up with that MP afterwards. I think we had hoped, yes. So like I said, we'd love to hear from you after this meeting to hear about how it goes. We're kind of running short on time. So I just want to make sure that everyone has there's the toolkit in the chat. It's got everything and also my contact information. So if you have any questions, if you get halfway into this and you're like, wait a minute, what? Just let us know and we can help you out. But we have only got a few minutes left, so I might just end that there. Tracey, what do you think? We were going to do breakout, or we were going to like do a discussion, but we're short on time.
Yeah, it is probably too short of time to do the discussion we were hoping to do, which was, oh, Emma has something to say.
Clara did tell me that people can stay in the breakout group if this is something that they're interested in. So I don't want breaks are important, but if you feel like you want to use your break to continue this conversation, you can do that.
And there may be a slight delay, like they may close the breakout rooms and then reopen them, just because we want to send you guys back to the main room for instructions. So just, it might be a bit chaotic at first, but we hope that you can continue the discussion.
So the discussion we were going to have is the different approaches that you might want to take depending on what party your MP is from. So are there folks on this call? Can you let us know which parties your MPs that you're hoping to meet with are from, and we can see if there's a trend?
Also, I note Lois's hand is up.
Lois.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, guys, if as a follow-up, if anyone on our group wants to pursue this, and I heartily endorse and encourage them to do so, but if you want any sort of personal tips on meeting with your MP, don't hesitate to call or reach out to me, because I know them all, and know what floats their boat and know their little perks and bad things. So don't feel like you're out there. And Emma and Robin and everyone else on this great campaign knows all this anyway, but there's lots of people who can help. If you have any barriers at all, just reach out, okay? And I'm just lois.corbett@conservationcouncil.nb, so you can just get me, okay?
Amazing. So are there any, all of your MPs are liberal or conservative, is that right?
Yes, so we have 6 liberals and 4 conservatives.
Okay, great. It looks like most folks are meeting with liberals. So do we want to talk about some specifics for influencing liberals? I'm going to pass it back over to Robin for that.
Yeah. We had more time. We had hoped to do a bit of a brainstorm, popcorn style, hear from you about what you've all heard from your liberal MPs, because I think something that happens is that MPs and other politicians get into these talking points, and it's sometimes hard to combat them. So we wanted to see what you've heard from these MPs already, and then maybe we can workshop together some helpful conversation pieces to work around some of those talking points or break through them to make the point. So has anyone recently met with their MP or have any thoughts that come to mind about what that experience has been like?
I haven't recently met with mine. It's been a while. I know he voted against the wealth tax, so when I saw that on there, I was worried about that. And he also had campaign signs that say Wayne Long stands for climate change action or something. So I can kind of use that against him. And he likes to say he's not liberal, he's independent and votes the way he wants.
Well, that's an interesting take, to be part of a party and then claim it to be independent. I just noticed that the breakout groups, it says they're going to end in 30 seconds, and I think that we're going to get kicked out, which would be pretty disruptive to this conversation. Sorry, I'm feeling distracted by that. We had thought of a few things. This is a bit funky now because we might all just end this conversation. But one thing we hear from the Liberals, and it's kind of like what you were just saying, Linnea, is like, we are climate leaders. We are doing enough. We do have enough. Our targets are good enough. And so I would pick.
Sadia, si vous voulez, ces cartes-là, en tout cas, côté péninsule, on les a.
The Canadian Peninsula, we have this type of information, but for the others, maybe through the reasons